Morning, everyone. My name's Fiona Breen, and I'm with ABC Rural, based in Hobart, Tasmania. Currently executive producer for ABC Rural's Tasmanian team. Welcome to the Horticulture and Labour section of this ABARES conference. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on, the Ngunnawal people. I acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. I extend that recognition to the traditional custodians of all other lands on which we are gathered today, and to all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples attending this event. Now, this sector's really been through the ringer in the past 12 months. Good seasons in many areas, but that shortage of labour due to COVID, that terrible COVID, has really caused problems, particularly with those travel restrictions. Who would have thought we'd miss the backpacker so much? At the ABC, we've followed this industry challenge from every state and looked at every pivot, I hate to use that word, but every pivot, every adaptation the different businesses have used to attract more people and different types of workers. It's been 12 months, a commandos course really, barriers, hoops to jump, mud to wade through, and a lot of things to dodge, but we're getting through there, and perhaps there is light at the end of the tunnel. Now, before I introduce you to the first section, just a couple of notes. You can submit and upvote questions during the presentations via the menu on the left. The live Q&A will be at the end of the session after all presentations. We will endeavour to get to as many questions as possible. If the speaker has given permission, their slides are available in the resources tab for you to download. The session will be recorded and available under the session catch-up tab after 24 hours. Now, in this session, we'll present ABARES' latest forecast for the sector and focus on the issue of farm labour. What are the forces shaping the demand and supply of workers in this sector, and what effects have lower numbers of international workers had over the past year? What are we looking forward to? Our first speaker today is Charley Xia. He is an ABARES economist. He's been with the ABARES since 2015, and he's based in the agricultural forecasting and trade branch. His work has covered commodity markets forecasts and industry analysis, including research that's focused on agricultural productivity, global market competitiveness, and seasonal labour use in Australia. Perhaps Charley Xia could give us a bit of an idea of where we're moving forward. Let's welcome Charley Xia.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Horticulture and Labour session of the ABARES National Outlook Conference. My name is Charley Xia, and I'll be talking to you today about ABARES Outlook for the horticulture sector. This work has been done jointly with my colleague Peter Collins, and you can find more details of our analysis on ABARES' website. Now, Australian horticulture is a diverse sector, and each industry has its own challenges and opportunities. I'll be focusing on some of the common factors that we think will be driving sector performance, focusing particularly on the short term, which covers the rest of this financial year and into the next of 2022. These 2 years is where we see the sector facing significant labour challenges, but also opportunities from high domestic demand. The two key factors I want to touch on, which are production that's affected by labour shortages and high retail demand, have already contributed to high prices in the last year. In 2020, retail prices of fruit and vegetables stayed quite high compared to the past periods. They were high compared to the 5-year average in each of the 4 quarters, just as the pandemic sent many Australians to stay at home and also close borders, which contributed to reduced labour supply for the sector. While seasonal conditions improved in most growing regions, especially for those in New South Wales and Queensland, there were significant challenges harvesting those produce in order to meet the increased demand. With harvest having moved across to southern growing regions during summer and autumn, we're forecasting production losses of different degree because of those continuing labour shortages. And that's contributing to our forecast that prices are likely to remain high in the rest of this financial year and into the next. We think production losses will be most significant right now during late summer and early autumn. This has been informed by our farm survey data showing that employment of casual and contract labour on horticultural farms in the past. In 2018-19, those numbers fluctuated around 80,000 workers in each month from July to January, before spiking in February to about 120,000, and remaining relatively high into early autumn. Overseas workers, especially backpackers, were the majority of those employed, but their numbers have fallen sharply since the beginning of the pandemic. With international borders unlikely to open in the short term, we don't think there'll be enough local workers to make up for the loss of backpackers in many regional areas. Regions that will be most significantly affected are those further away from capital cities and those that require a significant number of workers right now. The impact of labour shortages on regions and produce will be felt differently, and we think the most significant disruptions will be felt right now. In Australia, the movement of harvest south over summer is made clear by the map to the left. The map shows regions requiring additional workers over summer in increasing shades of blue, and those needing less workers in red. On a state-by-state basis, the chart on the right also shows that the total labour requirements in Queensland and New South Wales remain more consistent throughout the year than elsewhere. It's in the increased labour needs in southern growing regions during February to April that we think poses the greatest risks to production. This is leading us to forecast that fruit production over summer and autumn will be worst affected, and those, especially those in the stone fruit, pome fruit, and table grape industries. We also think that vegetable production will be less affected than fruit, and that's because more vegetable farms are situated closer to cities with better access to labour. It's also the case that the scales of production on vegetable farms tend to be smaller, which means that family members can often make up for the loss of the shortfall in labour needs. The second factor that's important to our short-term outlook is a favourable demand prospects that's likely to continue to support prices. That's mainly because with Australian consumers spending more time at home than before the pandemic, the increased consumption at home will continue to support high retail demand. Now, we're not expecting those demand to reach the highs of last year's, as highlighted in the chart on the left, which shows that grocery spendings drove the majority of the increase in retail turnovers in 2020. But we do think that there will be changes in consumption patterns, including more emphasis on healthy eating and food to accompany working from home, that's likely to continue in the short term. We also don't think Australian consumers will significantly reduce their purchases because of high prices. This isn't just because there are few substitutes for fresh produce, but also because spending on them is a really small component of household budgets. Just to put that into perspective, the food budget for the average Australian household accounted for around 10% of their annual expenditure before the pandemic. Fruit and vegetables were only about 25% of spending on food. If we do the maths, high prices on fresh produce will only have affected 2.5% of total household expenditure in the past. And that doesn't even factor in the changes in spending patterns that's likely to continue in the short term, especially when Australians will be limited on expensive travels and holidays, and many of them can afford to redistribute their savings to other purchases. In summary, our short-term forecast is that horticultural production will be disrupted by significant labour shortages, especially to production over summer and early autumn. We think demand prospects are favourable. Those consistent demand, combined with the small share of fresh produce in household budgets, means that Australian consumers will not significantly reduce their purchases when prices rise. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to catching up with you, along with the rest of the panel members in this session's Q&A. Please also visit our website for more detailed analysis of our short-term outlook, but also medium-term projections.
Thank you, Charley Xia, for that outlook for horticultural production. He's an economist with ABARES. Coming up next, we have Gavin Scurr. Gavin Scurr is the Managing Director of Piñata Farms. Gavin, thanks for joining us and handing over to you.
Hey, I'm Gavin Scurr, and along with my brother Stephen, we own Piñata Farms. We're third generation fruit growers based here on the Sunshine Coast. However, we now farm in 7 locations across Australia. We grow raspberries in Tasmania. We have 3 sites in Queensland, 1 in Stanthorpe where we grow strawberries and raspberries. We're based here on the Sunshine Coast where we also grow pineapples, strawberries and raspberries. We're in operation in Mareeba in North Queensland where we grow pineapples. And then we've got 3 sites in the Northern Territory, 1 in Mataranka and Katherine where we grow mangoes. And then we've got a joint venture with the Lamana Premier Group in Darwin where we grow bananas, pineapples and mangoes. As a business, we harvest pineapples and strawberries and raspberries every week of the year, and mangoes during October through to February. While we harvest fruit each week of the year across our business, each site is obviously still seasonal, and this causes massive differences in labour requirements on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis. For instance, our mango farms typically have 3 or 4 permanent people there that run the crop for 11 months of the year, and then that blows out then to 120 odd people to harvest and pack the crop during the 3 to 4 week harvest period. Berries, while they have a longer season, similar story. We'll have 3 to 4 permanent people. However, during the harvesting season of 3 to 4 months, that can go out to 300 or 400 people on that site. Pineapples is a longer season and is a more stable workforce, but it's not unusual to need 3 times as many people some months as we do in others. Over time, we've found that Australians have become less willing to do this type of work, and we've become more and more reliant on foreigners. That was firstly backpackers and more recently seasonal workers from the Pacific Islands. The seasonal worker program enables workers to come to Australia for up to 9 months and work in agriculture. These workers are excellent for us because they can come back year after year, so they become very experienced, very efficient and get a lot of work done. However, due to having to find work for them for a minimum of 5 months to make it work for them and up to 9 months, it works for us as a base for our labour force, and while we shift them between sites regularly within our business, we still need a more transient, shorter term workforce to do the peaks of the season in each region. This is where the backpackers have become crucial, and it's not uncommon for us to have a couple of hundred backpackers for a few weeks during the peak of any season. With the closure of our borders due to COVID, and we understand why that is and support that decision to close our borders, a lot of the backpackers have gone home, and there's obviously no more coming in. This has made us even more reliant on the seasonal workers who largely have stayed during the last 12 months or so, and we appreciate them for that. However, they are also keen to get back home to their loved ones sooner rather than later, and we need more people to harvest the crops. Because of the lack of labour on our farms, harvest has obviously become a priority, so whatever available workforce we do have on a daily basis is prioritised to harvest, and then if we've got enough workers we will then put them to other tasks, maintaining the crop and planting. However, what this has led to is that we have significantly reduced plantings due to not having enough labour to get the ground ready or to plant that crop, let alone have confidence that we're going to have enough labour to harvest that crop at some future date. Another issue that we're finding is that with the lack of seasonal workers returning back into Australia and also the reduction in backpackers, is that we've had a significant reduction in productivity of our workforce. We're finding a lot of inexperienced, unmotivated people looking for work or working on our property, and it's not unusual for us to have a productivity decrease of 30 to 40% in some crops due to the lack of experienced workforce we have. that has a direct relationship to our cost. So our cost is going up correspondingly, our labour to harvest that crop due to the lack of productivity of the inexperienced workforce we're having. For us, we believe there's a multi-pronged solution to this. There's not one silver bullet that will fix this. For us, the priority is to actively reopen the seasonal worker program. We applaud the federal government's decision to reopen that program. However, we need to sort out practical quarantining of those workers. We desperately need to bring in 20,000 workers quickly to arrest this issue. However, while we're doing trial flights and bringing in a few hundred people at a time on an ad hoc basis, the situation continues to get worse. We obviously want to employ as many Aussies as we can, and as a business we've employed over 600 Aussies in the last few months. However, very few of them have lasted more than a week. As I said before, they're just not willing to do this sort of work for the pay that's being offered. The job seeker payment is so good that they come and work for me all week for a couple $100 a week more than they would get staying at home doing nothing. There's been very low uptake on the shifting to the regions as well, as in a lot of our farms are not in close to towns, and there's been a very low uptake on that as well. And obviously the third one is to try and get more backpackers or a harvest visa from specific countries, because I appreciate that we can't just open our borders to everyone, but if we could get a harvest visa from a country like Taiwan, for instance, that would make a significant where we can get experienced people. They grow a lot of our crops in Taiwan, for instance, as an example. So we could bring experienced people in on a specific harvest visa to get our crops harvested. So look forward to hearing your questions during question time, and hopefully I can shed more light on some of the issues that we're facing in our business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gavin Scurr from Piñata Farms, and so much experience with that whole issue of the workforce with so many different crops across the country in most states of Australia. And don't forget that you can ask some questions in the area provided and make sure we can get to those at the end of this session. Next up, we have Richard Palmer. He's the Chief Executive of Summer Fruit New Zealand, the peak body representing growers, packers and exporters of peaches, plums, apricots, nectarines and cherries. Summer Fruit New Zealand has been involved in a broad range of policy matters resulting from COVID-19, notably dealing with this access to seasonal labour and logistics of air freight to markets for New Zealand's export cherry crop. Let's hand over to Richard Palmer from Summer Fruit New Zealand.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Richard Palmer, the Chief Executive of Summer Fruit New Zealand. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of the land from which I present today, and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Today I am to give a perspective on what the New Zealand summer fruit sector did to address the worker shortage for the current harvest season, a challenge well and truly shared here in Australia. Until May 2020, Summer Fruit New Zealand had no real mandate on labour, but that all changed with COVID-19. It's fair to say we started out pretty cold as an organisation, both our team's understanding and being short on the sector facts. Interestingly, whilst we have a compulsory levy, we haven't collected good information on our sector's growth and production. I know that growers hate surveys, but the knowledge that they provide is absolutely fundamental to our work. In this season, that was labour demand and also air freight capacity planning for our export cherry crop. On the flip side, information about available workers also changed constantly, all of which was a real guess because, of course, we hadn't dealt with a global pandemic before. So mid last year, we surveyed our growers and you can see the results. A huge peak were in the height of the cherry harvest, split pretty much around the Christmas holiday. Was that to be a blessing or a curse? So what did we do? We formed a working group under the board. We had two distinct approaches, a national one, which we led for summer fruit growers, and a regional approach using local growers and stakeholders, and latterly our own seasonal labour coordinator. In the national policy area, a small pan-horticulture group of sector CEOs worked very closely with officials and ministers on getting more people available for work, backpacker visa extensions and RSE workers from the Pacific, but also with the Ministry for Social Development to attract New Zealanders into the season. We experienced considerable challenge in convincing some officials and ministers of the labour challenge, both the numbers we collectively as the horticulture sector put together and the likely solutions. This remains an ongoing area for our engagement. Notwithstanding that, the support from social development officials at the regional level and the policy teams in Wellington was very good, and we've seen adoption of new policies and initiatives. Meanwhile, the summer fruit team worked hard to connect with New Zealand worker cohorts, university students, the Motor Caravan Association, International Student Organisation, etc. For us, no cohort was off the table. We developed a national brand, the hand-picked crew you see in the slides, as the basis for our messaging, including a national attraction campaign with the Ministry for Primary Industries, which we secured for several months, focused on summer fruit, and was very successful. Regionally, we identified, later than was ideal, that we needed resources on the ground to coordinate the work of growers and workers and to tie all the efforts together. So we hired a labour coordinator. We also needed feedback from across the region to inform our policy approaches, refine our support for growers, and to understand the success or failure of our efforts. Among many other things, we worked with regional businesses on a hand-picked crew card, providing discounts for seasonal workers. Naturally, we also had to work to change some of the grower expectation too, including encouraging growers to lift wages and bring in new accommodation options. Like it or not, we had to compete for labour with better conditions, an issue I'll touch on later. Pacific workers has been a real focus for us, as it has been here in Australia, with quite some success, I should note. Firstly, we had to get people home, and it was hugely satisfying to help manage getting over 1,000 Ni Vanuatu home in July last year. We've got challenges now with the remaining workforce, under increased pressure from home to stay and work, but also to increase their remittances, leaving them out of pocket here in New Zealand. We are now getting workers into New Zealand, which, as you all know, is a difficult exercise with the border closed. I give credit to my sector colleagues and the government for making this happen in New Zealand, noting the big difference for New Zealand compared to Australia is that growers are wearing all of the cost, quarantine costs, wages for time in quarantine, and paying the living wage. We had to tell our story, so a key focus of our message was getting out to all New Zealanders. We needed support from the community and focused our message on the Central Otago cherry harvest because the region was so heavily hit by the tourism downturn. We figured that support for our growers was best achieved by talking about why the fruit harvest as an economic lifeline was now so essential to this region and therefore a cause to get behind. Getting ministers to understand the severity of the problem was challenging, especially as we had an election focused on the safety of New Zealanders in the time of COVID that was delayed a month from September to October 2020. This delayed decisions, in particular about RSE workers coming to New Zealand, but also about extensions for other visa holders, especially those backpackers who continue to represent a large part of our harvest workforce. In all of this, we learnt to be adaptable, to be responsive to media, and to be genuine in our public messaging. So what did we learn? There's no doubt that we benefited from strong support from our government through our relationships. Sector organisations must build and nurture these. We have to build broader worker cohort relationships. We were fortunate that students had fewer options for work, and consequently we met with all university career managers in one meeting to discuss the opportunity for them. We need to be able to do this with other cohorts. I think we had too many conflicting options across the horticulture sector for online job advertisements. We need to make it easier for workers by reducing the digital meeting places. We learned the government can and do change the rules, and quite quickly in this environment sometimes. Decisions on visas that worked for us were just changed just before harvest as other sectors also struggled for workers. Ultimately, we are competing with other sectors, so having strong relationships and a coherent approach is a must. So what about the future? Well, I think we've cemented the understanding that our traditional workforce, backpackers, RSE workers, and other committed seasonal workers are productive. We have to reinforce and nurture that. We've learnt that RSE workers do want to work in New Zealand. At the moment, their remittances are crucial to Pacific Island economies. Their work in New Zealand is important to us and to them, and it's a real win-win. We must preserve that. One of our key issues with new worker cohorts is productivity, often way below the norm. The responsibility for this lies with both employers and legislators. That means an appropriate legal mechanism to quickly move these unproductive workers out of the orchard. That's management training, good systems, but importantly, an employment legislative basis that manages unproductive workers without detrimentally affecting productive workers. We're not there yet, and I fear that in New Zealand it's about to get worse. We must strive for productivity gains where we have big labour pools, i.e. at harvest. Better tree structures, the use of orchard platforms, especially in crops where picking bags are heavy and ladders are used, and improve production to maximise crop value are all necessary. We'll have to continue to trade labour for capital, particularly in post-harvest. That will mean new facilities at regional scale, suitably sited, not each grower with their own packhouse. Planting new orchards must be set for mechanisation and robotics if you want to survive. In summary, we were lucky with our timing in having students and other holiday workers available. I suspect we would have struggled had our full crop been harvestable. That said, we worked hard on attracting workers and we were genuinely pleased that at the start of harvest, growers had sufficient workers. That was a team effort between Summer Fruit New Zealand, our growers, regional agencies, and government officials and ministers, and a tremendous response from New Zealanders. Simply, we had little option other than to get cracking on this program because the alternative of not harvesting our income source for the year is untenable. Thank you for your time, and I hope that adds something useful to the debate.
Thank you, Richard Palmer, Summer Fruit New Zealand. He's the chief executive of that body. That's the peak body representing growers, packers and exporters of peaches, plums, apricots, nectarines and cherries in New Zealand. Now, don't forget that you can send us a question. To do that, you submit and upvote questions during the presentations via the menu on the left, and the live Q&A will be at the end of the session after all the presentations, and we'll endeavour to get to as many of those questions as possible. Now we go to Michael Fryszer. Michael's got 35 years experience on the front line of people management across Australia. So he and his fellow directors and team are passionate and knowledgeable long-termers. Interesting. Michael founded Connect Group in 2009 specifically to promote and be a leader in assisting our horticulture and broader agriculture sectors to embrace the very viable SWP and in recent times the PLS, both of which are solutions to old labour supply issues. No doubt he's been very busy this season. I now introduce you to Michael Fryszer from the Connect Group.
Thank you for joining me for my brief talk, The Pathway to a Competitive and Returning Horticultural Workforce in Australia, Challenges and Opportunities. My aim is to take you on a bit of our journey over an 11-year period with the seasonal worker program since it was a fledgling pilot way back in 2009-2010. Along the way, I'll point out some key learnings from the perspective of a major labour hire approved employer whose business is now national, with a strong and loyal client and worker base, and whose reputation I believe is second to none. By the way, our returning worker rate remains at over 90%, which I'm really happy and proud to tell you. Also, for your information, I'm co-founder and current board member of Approved Employers of Australia, which is the representative group made up of small to very large AEs in Australia and whose men and women represent the majority of seasonal worker program PLS workers in the country to talk about where things are at today and where we're going moving forward. We do have to step back in time for a few minutes. Please indulge me. Flashback to 2010, and we had approximately 15 people out of a total of around 100 in the pilot scheme in the country. Little did we know the barriers we would hit that would take years to break down. Cost too much, too hard, who else is using it? Were just some of the questions and comments we received. Times were so very hard then, we almost went bankrupt twice. My fellow director and part owner, Gavin Scurr, had to leave the business for almost 2 years. And Pam Gray, our admin manager, who's still with us, battled on, and we lived on a week-to-week basis. We were very fortunate. In fact, we were blessed at the time to have 1 or 2 growers who believed in what we were doing and that it was the future, but also that they wanted to be partners in it, and they invested their time and money. High quality accommodation, including registered commercial kitchens delivering food to workers, numerous renovated, extended, purpose-built farmhouses, a fleet of buses delivering workers, engagement with the workforce on a personal basis and a regular basis. This was a turning point, I believe, for us and for the SWP. It allowed us to see critical mass, and more varied comparisons were available to us. Hands-on involvement of growers was a feature. Farmers hearing from farmers how this new workforce was going was a key. We learnt to closely work with our farmers, help them in every way to transition, because that is what it was and that is what it still is today. We worked on productivity and piece rates, getting the science right, getting productivity measures in place. We helped with farm familiarisation induction. We helped our men and women with getting used to living in Australia and working in Australia. We helped them with their housing and transport familiarisation and kept that up, and we still do. We have our people involved in communities, and we involved our communities with our people. We always go the extra yard for our people and for our clients throughout any placement, and we stay proactive, stay proactive. We were the first AE to recruit from Vanuatu and also from Timor-Leste, and these countries rank so very highly now. We played a major role in pressing the then Labor federal government to make the pilot into a fully fledged program in 2012, which they did, and we're very proud of our involvement in that. It took another 4 years for the SWP to really gain the compounded growth of around 40% that it sees today. The success formula has not changed for us, at least anyway, throughout the years of growth. Invest in your men and women. Encourage and help your clients to do likewise. Don't take any of them for granted. That goes a hell of a long way to guaranteeing a returning and skilled workforce year after year. We have many men and women who are in their 8th and 9th years with us, and their stories are amazing. And that's something else I'm very proud of, and we're very proud of. Fast forward to 2020, COVID and our world has changed. Backpackers leave in droves, and they're not coming back anytime soon. Freeze on further incoming and outgoing SWP workers. Restart programs begin later in the year. Queensland, Northern Territory and WA lead the charge to bring back SWP workers into the country. Other states gradually find their feet. Major industry players come together and jointly work on labour issues in what I believe is a major shift, incredibly positive for the future and already achieving results. Attitude change, practices change within the farming sector and labour supply sector. In my home state of Victoria, the government is leading the charge to address rural worker accommodation shortages with public consultation and a planning review already completed. Other states and territories are following. The SWP is on many people's and organisations' list of conversation and action topics. Approved Employers of Australia with Steve Burdett as chair is playing a major role in assisting AEs and becoming the go-to body for the SWP and PLS. I'd like to summarise by saying this. The future, despite all the upheaval, remains strongly bright. We need to continue down the pathway of change and unite in that common purpose. As we are doing now during this period, I urge regulators to listen more and be guided by those in the sector. I've been blessed to play a change role in the farming sector that I've loved and been involved with since my teenage years. To receive the ongoing and expanding trust and commitment of our farmer partners is an honour, and it is recognition of our incredible staff, both within our internal team nationally and also to our SWP men and women who are part of our Connect Group family. The keys to a returning and competitive workforce in Australia were contained in this talk. Of that, I'm certain. They are not complicated, but they do require acknowledgement, acceptance and involvement by farmers in this new pathway. It is a rare win-win for all in a tough world. You can do it yourself as an AE and have great success, or ease the burden and find a highly experienced and proactive labour hire AE to assist you. I'm proud to know and share our collective knowledge and consult with many of them, so your choice is broad. For those contemplating it, go ahead and dip your toe in the water soon. I ask you. The time will never be better, and you won't look back as your own skilled and returning horticultural workforce does just that. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation there, Michael Fryszer from the Connect Group. A lot of interesting things that we can talk about. Now's the time to put forward any of your questions. As I said before, you can submit and upvote questions via the menu on the left, and we're just about to start that live Q&A session. And we'll endeavour to get to as many of those as possible. And then, of course, if the speaker's given permission, their slides are available in the resources tab for you to download, and the session will be recorded and available under the session catch-up tab after 24 hours. I'd like to start proceedings and start the questions with a question to Charley Xia. Charley, just how high do you think some of those fruit and veggie prices will get for consumers?
Yep, sure, Fiona. Our forecast is those fruit and vegetable prices will rise about 7 to 29%. And the most heaviest rise will be for those summer fruit I talked about, so your pome fruit, your stone fruit, and your table grapes. For some of those summer vegetables, we're predicting a bit less, and that's what we're sort of forecasting at the moment.
So you're expecting those prices have sort of already started, but they're going to continue to get to that level?
Yeah, so we know that the seasonal conditions being sort of mild and much more favourable than past seasons, and in the past, the dry and hot weather sort of allowed the fruit to mature much earlier, but right now it's probably pushed back a bit. So we're thinking those production effects will come in later during the current autumn, right about now.
And particularly around that southern area now in this
That's right.
autumn sort of period. Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Charley Xia, for that. Now, Gavin Scurr, I get a headache just thinking about all the different crops that you're across and that you're growing across Australia. What is it, 1,000 hectares or something? So many different types of fruit. What a tough time for you. Have you had to actually leave some of those fruits in the ground because of this worker shortage?
Yeah, absolutely, Fiona. We left about over 3 million punnets of strawberries to rot in the field here on the Sunshine Coast at the back end of our season last year, so September and October. We've left 400 odd tonne of pineapple in the field in Mareeba over the December period when the mango industry is busy in Mareeba at the same time. So we lost a lot of our workforce to mangoes, just looking to do something different. They've been doing pineapples for some time. Mangoes is a bit easier work as well. So yeah, absolutely, we've lost or left crop in the field. We've lost raspberries in Stanthorpe over summer as well for the same reasons. So it's been real, I guess, from the financial impact to our business, obviously. However, there's also the emotional impact on our staff, particularly our long-term people who've been, excuse the French, but busting their guts all season to produce that crop in very difficult situations. Nowhere near enough labour, working an insane amount of hours to then watch it rot because we cannot get enough people to harvest it when that's the final hurdle. And that's the challenge that most farmers are facing during peak of season right across Australia.
And that mental health is another issue that you really need to address, even though you've got all these other problems going on at the same time in terms of picking your harvest.
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously distressing for the owners, but also our staff. We're really feeling for it, and we've got several that are actually on stress leave at the moment that due to the strain that they've been under for 12 months now. I guess that is the concern, is that this is still getting worse. We haven't turned the corner yet.
And that's where you say you really need, what you were saying, 20,000 workers quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. The industry data supports that if we could bring 20,000 seasonal workers or Pacific Islanders in tomorrow, that would curb the flow. That's not going to fix the problem, but that would be the start of getting the ship turned around. There's still over 1,000 backpackers a week going home, and we've got very few coming in. We've got no backpackers coming in, and as as Michael explained before, there's been some seasonal workers come back in, but a fraction of how many have actually left in the last 12 months.
Are you paying them enough? Are you convincing them to stay, making the conditions pretty good?
We're making it as good as we can. Obviously, the job is the job. It is out, harvesting, packing fruit largely. So that is the work. However, the conditions, as employers, we pride ourselves on having good facilities, good conditions, and look after our people, as do most farmers. Unfortunately, there's a few bad eggs in every industry, and they've gotten the limelight. There's always examples. Then, to be honest, they need to be ratted out and put out of business. They need to be smacked that hard by regulators that they can't continue. But by and large, most farmers are genuine people and are doing the right thing and are doing absolutely all they can to make the conditions as good as possible. And the reality is if you don't get any workers at the moment.
Okay, well, look, we've got a couple of questions here. Now, as a citrus grower in Queensland, Susan Jenkins says, I fully endorse Gavin's comments. We still haven't secured enough labour for the start of our season in April. Our access to Pacific seasonal workers is limited to 10 weeks in 10 days a week in hotel quarantine, when our labour requirements for the season are around 120. By the time we get them in, the season will be finished if we are approved, as all growers are competing for this 10-stroke week. You probably know what that means more than I do. Gavin, I think that's directed at you.
Yeah, happy to take that one on, Fiona. Personally, we need to sort out the quarantine aspect of the seasonal worker program, as I mentioned in my presentation. But the federal government's reopened the seasonal worker program. We applaud that. However, we need to actively get them on the ground. We need to make it happen. And the issue we've got is quarantine is the bottleneck in Queensland and Northern Territory, particularly. The two states that we operate in, on-farm quarantine is the only way we can get them in at the moment. That is hugely expensive to us to set up the actual quarantine and the protocol to do that. We're doing that. We're willing to do that. However, it's severely limiting how many people can come in. I think what we need is dedicated seasonal worker quarantine facilities that can handle 1,000 a week as a minimum, set up across the country and get these planes flying. As Richard mentioned in his talk, the islands are desperately in need of this revenue that we can give these people to take back home. That they've been shut for 12 months like we have. Tourism is their major industry over there. In some countries, their only industry, and that's been shut. So those countries are really struggling economically as well. And on top of that, they're willing workers. As farmers, we just want willing people that are willing to come out and do the job. And that's what we find, particularly with the Pacific Islanders, and our experience largely is with Vanuatu, more than some of the other countries. They're just lovely people. They just work all day with a smile on their face. They just really appreciate the opportunity and the privileges they see it to be able to work and send money home to make their family's life better.
Thank you, Gavin Scurr, for answering that question. We've got a question for Richard. Richard, this is from Rachel McKenzie. What are the quarantine costs for RSE workers, and what are the arrangements? Are they the same as for returning Kiwis? Did you get any government support or subsidies to employ Kiwis, and what's the going rate for a fruit picker? So a few questions there. Just let me know if you need me to check in on those again.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks, Rachel. The costs for us just for quarantine are about $5,500 per worker, and we're about $1,500 in wages. So their contract throughout the year is a minimum 30 hours. So we're paying 30 hours a week for the 2 weeks in quarantine. And our government was very clear that no further deductions for increased travel costs over and above a normal year could be passed to workers as well. So we're about $7,000 per worker at the point of exiting quarantine. So if they're here for 7 months, which is the current deal, 1,000 hours, we're roughly $7 an hour in wages already per worker. And on top of that, partly because we, as Gavin's mentioned, highly productive workers, the government has said to us we've got to pay them the living wage. Now, in most cases, for people on piece rates in the field, that is not a problem. Lots of our Pacific workers are earning well over that, certainly where they're harvesting on piece rates. So $7,000 per person to get them in, cash up front, all paid up. And it has driven pay rates. You may have seen recently this week the Kiwi Fruit Industry in New Zealand has launched their seasonal labour campaign and collectively had committed to the living wage, which is $22.10, so $2.20 above the current minimum wage in New Zealand. So costs are rising. And I think to Gavin's point, not only the cost rising on a per hour or per piece basis, but the productivity from newer cohorts is a real issue. I've got employers I'm talking to who've got some workers picking on contract earning $37, $38 an hour, and others they're topping up by $12 an hour just to get to the minimum wage. And I think that's a challenge, is that, as Gavin said, some people not as well attuned to the work, but at the bottom end, the productivity is costing us a fortune.
Okay, thank you for that. Michael Fryszer, you sounded like everything was sort of going fairly well, but, we're hearing some interesting stories here, and a lot of people need more workers. And are we doing enough?
No, we're not doing enough. We're nowhere near doing enough. But we're moving, and we weren't moving a few months back. I agree with what Gavin said and what you also said. We need a dedicated a point of entry
for workers, and we need to upscale. It's too piecemeal at the present time. We don't have the numbers coming in, and also we don't have the regularity of outgoing workers, so our people can go and have a break as well. So it's a two-way street. It can be done a lot better, and I'm hopeful, as I said in my talk, that consultation with industry will help. And if we can get some designated entry points en masse, it'll make a huge difference. It'll make a huge difference. But we need to get better at what we're doing.
Well, it sounds like there's a bit of a theme going on there. A couple of more questions have come in. Charlie, with interest rates so low and technology improving at the rate it is, why isn't capital filling the space of labour? That's from Kai Wakeham and Powell.
A lot of those new technologies aren't just, they're more sort of in the packing sheds at the moment, and a lot of the harvesting still require manual labour. We're sort of expecting that over the medium term, this rising cost of labour will incentivise more farmers to invest in those technologies, and we're sort of thinking those robot harvesters will become more, more common, yeah.
I know I've seen a few more apple harvesters down here in Tassie, or at least machinery that help pick faster.
Yeah, can I just also add to that, those also requires adjustments to how the orchard rows and spaces are sort of spaced out, so it will take time. But of course, in the short term, we're looking at quite a sizable shortfall in labour shortages, and that's what we're sort of assuming over the short term in our forecasts.
Less vases, which you can see behind me, those trees in the shapes of vases.
Yeah, that's right.
And more in the vine type structures that are easier to pick.
Just also on past studies on those productivity issues that's been raised, we've done some past studies which looked at the different productivities between seasonal workers and backpackers and returning seasonal workers and backpackers. So just a lot of those reiterate what the speaker's been telling us, that the seasonal workers are on average about 20% more productive for fruit picking exercises than backpackers, and those returning seasonal workers are 15% more productive than the new seasonal workers.
It's interesting because I note a few of you actually spoke about productivity, and with some of the locals, etc., and the different types of workforces that you've got, productivity is down up to 30%. Gavin, you've found that? Is that correct?
No, absolutely, and it's due to just lack of experience. And also, what we've found with a lot of Aussies, they're not actually work fit. They might be gym junkies, but 2 hours in a pineapple patch and they're absolutely knackered. So they're not used to doing that physical work, which obviously impacts productivity as well. So, yeah.
And Richard Palmer, it's not all rosy over there in New Zealand as well, all very similar issues. Are you paying more, or how are you getting more workers?
Absolutely, Fiona. I mean, we were lucky for the cherry harvest that we had the student cohort, so that alleviated a lot of that pressure.
But still productivity must have been down a bit.
Productivity was down, so the overall cost to harvest, as Gavin mentioned, is up. We were unfortunate this year to have a substantial rain event on New Year's Eve, which washed out half the cherry crop. So not only have you got all the costs of the first piece, you actually haven't recovered any of the margins at the other end of the harvest from the total volume. But as an example, I talked to an apple packer last week in the Hawke's Bay, and the Hawke's Bay is facing a shortage of 4,000 or 5,000 workers for the apple harvest. So the very issues Gavin talked about, crops won't get harvested, etc. They'd hired extra people to manage their HR. They'd invested $25,000 in a social media campaign. They've got really good accommodation that they're reluctant to offer for free, partly because they don't want a whole lot of unproductive people staying there. So they've got to up the piece rates to encourage the productivity and then deduct accommodation from that. So it is costing a lot more. And my estimate
are they paying more? Are they spending more on wages?
Absolutely. Yeah, paying more.
Above award rates
to stay. As I say, the kiwifruit industry already 10% above where they were last year at the outset. and cash incentives for people who stay for 3 weeks, for 6 weeks to the end of the season, discounts on accommodation. Our own packing business rates are up about 15%, lunch is provided, transport, all of those kind of things. So there's a lot of work going on and incentives to get people. The point, I think, for Michael and Gavin's perspective is that there just aren't the people either available, and where those that are available aren't as productive. So there's just, there's a big hole there that means some of the crop doesn't get harvested.
Okay, probably last question here for Gavin. If Aussies, and this is from Anonymous, if Aussies are able to earn more through JobSeeker, doesn't that mean that one way to attract more domestic workers is to offer them a higher wage? We've just talked about that. Given international border closures, access to cheap labour from overseas is unlikely in the short to medium term. How are operators combating stories in the media about negative backpacker experiences?
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, there is unfortunately some negative experiences, and they are a blight on our industry. And as I said before, they need to be stamped out and put out of business. However, as far as paying more, at the end of the day, farmers are paying what we have to get as much crop as possible harvested. So we're absorbing that cost at the moment because the price on the shelf really has no relationship to the cost of producing it in the short term. In the longer term, that will get corrected because farmers will just stop planting. They won't continue to grow a crop that they're not making money out of. But in the short term, we're wearing the cost of that as farmers because unless something goes short, and then what we're seeing is that if something does go short, we're not getting as high a price as we would normally have gotten based on that volume because consumers just migrate to something else. They don't have to buy strawberries, for instance. They'll migrate to blueberries if they're cheaper or even to pawpaws or pineapple or something else. There's plenty of fruit and vegetables still around. And as I mentioned in my talk, that the priority on every farm is obviously harvest. That's where the money comes in the door. It's the only time during our season it does come in the door. So hence that's the priority. And it's the other jobs that aren't being done. And unless growers get some confidence they're going to have an adequate workforce, plantings are being reduced. And that's where we'll see a longer term play on prices where things will become shorter.
It's having that real effect. Having that real effect on what you're planning for the next few seasons.
Absolutely, from a confidence perspective, but even just from the availability, we're struggling to find people to plant crops, let alone how many more we need to get them harvested. So, but in the short term, it's not really impacting prices that much yet. However, once fruit goes short, that's when it will become more expensive. So, and the longer this goes on, the harder it is to get back up to what we would consider normal production.
Thank you, Gavin.
Once you start winding up an operation and scaling down, very difficult to turn it back around again.
Yeah, for sure. Look, thank you very much, everyone, for taking part in this session, and particularly our speakers, Charley Xia from ABARES, economist with ABARES, Gavin Scurr, Managing Director of Piñata Farms, Richard Palmer, Chief Executive, Summer Fruit New Zealand, and Michael Fryszer from the Connect Group. It's been a really interesting discussion today on horticulture and the workforce. And now we're about to head to an awards session, so it would be great if people could stay with us. I'm just checking to see what that awards session is. Science and innovation. That starts at 11 o'clock. So stay with us and don't forget any more details. You can get these sessions online after the program. Thanks so much for joining us all today at the ABARES conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.